Welcome back to Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
Oh my gosh, Andy, what happened there?
I had a hiccup and it was coming out and I needed to stop it before I could say comma butt.
You do the countdown. You should know better.
Well, you normally do a little bit of an intro and I wasn't ready.
That was the intro. Anyhow, welcome back. Here with us, we have myself, Ruth.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy, flustered as ever.
Hi, everyone. It's Elijah, and I'm back. Returning guest.
You've been here the past, 2...
And I'm back.
You've only missed 2 weeks. Yeah. So, you're kind of like a main
I'm just
host,
shocked every time I get invited back on, so it comes out.
You keep inviting him?
No, he just gets in the car at this point.
I figured that's what happened. It just was more of hey, I'm going to film the podcast. All right, I'm putting on my shoes.
Well, here I come.
Actually, that kind of is how it goes. I'm not going to lie to you. But anyhow, so this week we're going to be discussing I said that weird, discussing. Sorry, Elijah's been pointing out my weird accents lately, so I noticed them more.
You know, and I think the only thing with that is, if you don't point it out, other people don't notice.
Yeah, but he points it out.
Yeah, but
so everyone else does notice.
Is that your goal? Your main goal is just to embarrass.
Sorry, Ruth.
So you were on a tangent there of what our actual point of today is.
Yes. So what we're going to be talking about, kind of ironically, is the church and image. Dun dun dun. I like doing dun dun duns. They make me happy. And so what we mean is the church and how it likes to uphold a certain image, as well as just the images we project as Christians and that we're told to project. So there's a lot, I think, that we can dive into with this one, just because there's a lot of people out there that I've met that felt like they had to live up to a very specific image of what the church or what Christians told them they had to be. And it caused a lot of problems later in life. But we'll get to that. What about you guys? What's your fun experience with the church and image?
Well, I think that the main thing...
that's where you went wrong.
All right, maybe I just won't talk. That's fine. So I think that even thinking about it, the main descriptor of what a church looks like, or the image that is portrayed, is that whole, and I know we talked about bringing this up at some point, the whole hand gesture that you have, that you teach children to, that it's I don't remember all of them, but
here's the church.
Here's the church.
Here's the steeple.
Here's the steeple.
Open the doors and see all the people.
That one. And funny enough, I think with the evolution of where churches are going, several parts of that are currently missing from what normal churches look like.
I.e., people.
Well, and steeples.
And you know what? That's fair. There is a big movement away from that.
People and steeples.
A lot of
written by Ruth Vander Sande, coming this fall.
A lot of different non-denominational churches and other churches like that are opting for building a church in mall structures or that kind of an area, which I think beautiful idea, wonderful idea. Go to where people are at, kind of thing. More on that later. But this denoting image of a steeple that you ring your bells from, you lose that with that kind of a thing. And so the church building in a town may just be less standouty. So you can't really tell what your church is in the town. You have to actually read signs and all this kind of stuff. And so to an extent, I think that's a downgrade from our image, but I also think it's an upgrade. But at the same time, image is dumb.
Well, it depends on what the purpose of your image is, I think. Fair. If the purpose of your image is to leave a lasting impression one way or another, steeple, hardcore way to go. Because that's a church. When you think of a steeple, you think of a church. Whereas if your image is supposed to be something that's moving away from a more traditional church to a more, church is stupid, but church.
We're a church?
No, we're not a church. We do work at a church, though, and run through a church. Does our church have a steeple? I've never paid attention. I can't think. I don't know. Andy.
I know we don't have bells.
Exactly. So do we have a steeple?
I don't think that this church does.
Oh, man. I actually don't know this. Coming next week.
I feel like I always
does the church have
the giant
a steeple?
brick chimney for the
Yeah,
steeple?
because we have a giant brick chimney.
I remember the
But
chimney.
I don't think you guys actually have one. But I don't know.
Anyhow, so I guess ironically, we'll come back and report on whether or not the church has a steeple.
We have to remember to come back and report.
I know we're never gonna remember that.
You're never gonna hear about
You'll
this.
never know.
One day you're just gonna have a note in your phone and you're gonna be like, the church doesn't have a steeple, guy.
3 years later. By the way,
In case you were wondering, from episode 24, the church does not have.
But anyhow, yeah. So if you're trying to go away from that more traditional image, which I think a lot of modern churches are, and especially non-denominational churches, which the whole point is to not be associated with a denomination and to be inviting, in theory, and to be inviting to all denominations, then moving away from that typical church structure makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think it depends on your image. Or what the purpose of your image is. Because I don't think image in and of itself is a bad thing. I think when image is the priority, that's when things get really, really skewed. And for me, I learned this the hard way at my Christian college that I went to.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't call out which college, but it's not that hard if you know me to figure out where I went to school. But I went to a small Christian college or university, and it was, I went there because, in part, it was a Christian school, and I wanted that experience. And I very quickly discovered that they didn't so much care about you. They more cared about how you looked when they presented the college to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And this in particular was really well shown on days when people would come and visit the university on like, when they would do like what do they call those days? They would have like high school students come in and do like a sleepover, and then they'd have to come to chapel the next day.
Like open house or something?
Sure.
My college did nothing like that.
Oh,
I have no
okay,
idea.
so maybe this isn't normal. Anyhow, well, they would do that. They would have like high school students, you could sign up, and then you could stay a night in the dorms and go to chapel the next day. And on that day, they always picked the most exuberant, like, preacher. They would, there was a lot of perks given to make sure you came to chapel that day. Because you got a certain amount of chapel skips, but they tried to really make sure that people didn't skip that. So that way, when all of the nice visitors were there, they would see how full the chapel was and how much praise there was and how holy we were. And that was a big main drive of that school. And again, I had amazing professors, and it wasn't them. It was just the administration seemed very bent on portraying a specific image, and they didn't so much care if they lived up to it. Mm-hmm. And that hit me really hard. And actually, it's the reason why I became a pastor, because I was so hurt by this image that they portrayed and they tried to portray, and how they lifted up all of these people who were doing some really not great things, but as long as you were able to make it look like you were good, then it was fine. And I think there's a lot of churches where that's true. I know a couple weeks ago we talked about bad pastors, and we talked about things being swept under the rug for the sake of the image. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just a lot more prevalent than we want to admit. Sometimes it's as dramatic as sweeping really big things under the rug. Sometimes it's as simple as making sure as many people as possible show up to the day the high school students visit, so that way it looks like you're a hip happening place. You can tell I'm hip and happening because I just said
because
that.
you just said hip and happening.
Oh, yeah.
That really drives home the fact that you are definitely that.
Super
It really
hip
just
and
proved that
happening.
you were not part of that image.
Thanks.
Because you said hip and
Thanks.
happening.
That was my goal. But I understand where that image comes from, because there is a call, and again, when we're dealing with something like Christianity, it's a transformative experience. When literally the terms "you die to your old self and you become alive in your new self" are used in Scripture. And there's a call to holiness. There's a call to be working towards perfection consistently and to be getting the fruits of the Spirit. So there are supposed to be reflections of what a Christian looks like.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you really look at what those are, they're very vague in a lot of ways. And they're not they tend to be used more to beat people down than to lift people up.
No offense, but isn't that a majority of the Bible? In this, the Old Testament, I'll say. A lot of laws and a lot of... This is Andy going on a rant about a lot of things that are used in the Bible to beat down those who are not a part and basically try and make you feel better about yourself because you know what to call other people out for.
I mean, yes,
And
essentially.
Yeah.
Well, and if you look at the way that God's working in the Old Testament, because reconciling the Old Testament to the New Testament is something that's very difficult for people because they seem almost like two totally different gods, right? You have the God of war and of smiting, and then you have the God of love found in Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit. And then there's Revelation, which people just try to wholly ignore or they really dedicate their lives to it. It's kind of one or the other. I don't know. It's a weird... But anyhow.
There are some kind of fantastic beasts in Revelations.
Where do I find them?
That was the joke I was going to make.
But I beat you to it.
But no, sorry. This is another side rant. Has to do with images a little bit. You know how the church doesn't like playing cards all that much, like Pokemon cards. There used to be an old playing card game that was based around the Book of Revelations.
Oh, dear sweet goodness. Okay.
No, it was fantastic.
Oh, it was good?
There were so many interesting cards, and me and my dad used to like collect them all and all this kind of stuff. And there was a whole bunch of different beasts that come out of Revelations that were different cards.
It's kind of fantastic.
It was kind of like Elijah. I don't know if you know Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well,
I know what Magic the Gathering is.
I barely know what Magic the Gathering is. So
okay.
But think about that. Except all of your cards are Jesus based.
Oh my gosh.
It's awesome.
That's kind of
And it's called Revelations, I think is what the name of the thing is called. And I think it is no more anymore because the guy like retired. But it was really fun to collect all those. And at some point I'll have to bring in and show you guys those.
You will.
But I think that's, another conversation about image. Because that's one of those things where it's more appealing to some parts of like the world. The rest of the world would be those playing cards that some of the church, has a very, very, very big problem with actually, dealing with and not dealing with. That's not the right word. Yeah, those are them. Yep. Sorry. Ruth has pulled up
The Revelation of John. That is what it's called.
Is that's just one set
that's
of
the card pack.
Yep. Okay.
Is it called Redemption?
Redemption.
Yeah, collectible card game based on the Bible.
We both had to Google this because...
Yeah, that was...
Anyhow.
Never heard of something like that.
It was awesome, and it was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely old and definitely looks like a...
It does look like
Magic the
Gathering.
Gathering-esque style, yeah.
Yeah, and see, what I hated is not all of them, a good majority of my cards, at least my favorite pack of cards, got ruined because we went camping and I brought them on a camping trip and they got wet.
Yeah.
I was so sad.
Oh my gosh.
Not the point I was getting at. Image and something that those cards reflect on is the side of the church that cares more about reaching people than what they look like while they're doing it. And especially what they look like while they're doing it to insiders. And I think that's a lot of what we see in these non-denominational churches that are appearing in strip malls and that kind of a thing is this attempt to push the conventional image to the side because it's obvious that it's not appealing to everybody anymore. And actually just like...
Anymore, I would argue it never did.
No, because 1800s... If you were going to go to church, you were not going to go to a church without a steeple. You were not going to go to
Actually, 1800s there were circuit riders who preached in the middle of yards. So,
but you understand what I mean, right?
I'm just
with
picking
the
on
older
you.
mindset, the synagogue,
Yeah.
all of these buildings that the buildings have like technical meaning. Like you still see this in like Orthodox churches that your church needs to be
a specific type.
Yeah, like a specific type. The inside
Cross shape.
ornate, like. Is that an actual thing?
Shape.
Okay,
Yeah.
I really
and a lot of early cathedrals. Sorry, okay.
I really don't know enough to
No,
like.
you're okay. You're okay.
It was just the point of.
I think we all get the point you're actually trying to make, though.
A lot of people in their attempts to reach the newer generation, and maybe not even that, just the attempts to survive, have noticed that the conventional church, the like beating you down with these holy images from every side of you, and not even beating you down, like that sounds very rude, but it kind
just
of
being
is.
everywhere. Yeah.
But that people are more for this simplistic, like give me my God kind of thing instead of try and beat me down with symbolism and imagery and all this kind of thing.
I think, it sounds like what you're trying to say, or what I'm hearing too, is like, I don't think anyone's arguing that fundamentalist Christianity like used to appeal to everyone, or didn't used to expel a bunch of people. Like it's pretty safe to say that from the beginning of like the fundamentalist movement that there was still always a large group of people who were like ostracized by it. But I think you can also make the claim that within the past few decades there's been a real movement in Christianity, or in traditional Christianity, to move away from some of those older traditions, and a lot of that includes, like, we're talking directly about like the actual look of a building or the actual location of a church, and it seems like within the past few decades, like you're saying, there's definitely been a lot more pushing to, like, for whatever reason it may be, whether it's trying to appeal to a broader audience or, like you said, just trying to survive somewhere else. There's definitely been a bigger push to have church gatherings in places that don't necessarily have the steeple look or the church look.
I'm sorry. I always have to say that it didn't appeal to all people, because not because of you, but because for a lot of people out there's this idealized version of Christianity that, like, in the 1800s, or even particularly now, the one that's called on is the 1960s, the church then was perfect and everybody wanted to be there, and it did all of these things. And really a lot of that was based, it's just not true. Because you can tell the success of a church based on its longevity. If you look at the generation that was raised in the 1960s church, how many of them want to be in church now? Yeah. So,
and the people who do want to be in church, sometimes you kind of have to look at why they want to be in the church and what they expect from it, everybody else too. Like, it's kind of like split between people who really don't want to be in it anymore, or people who are so dedicated to it because all they care about is, like you were talking about originally, the image of it.
Well, and there are people who genuinely are faithful and grew out of that church.
Course,
I think there are people that it did work for. I just think there's a lot of this idealization that happens, particularly in, I mean, we live in the nostalgia generation as well, where everything is look back at what everything was better before.
Everything
all the
else
time.
Was the golden days.
There's this great movie, Midnight in Paris, I think is what it's called, maybe something like that, and it has, what's the name of the guy who was in National Treasure, or not
Nick
National
Cage.
Treasures? He was in Night at the Museum. He was Owen Wilson. Owen Wilson.
I'm just throwing out names.
Sorry, is it Midnight in Paris with Owen Wilson?
Owen Wilson is in Midnight in Paris, so this could be what you're saying.
So I believe he's an artist in the movie, and he wants to go back to the good old days, the days of art and culture and writing. And so every midnight at this one street in Paris, he gets transported back to what he considers the glory days. And as the story progresses, he finds more and more people who talk about, like, oh man, I wish we were in the 1720s because things were so much better back then, or like wherever they were, it seemed like there was this nostalgia bend before they finally realized that there's always been this draw to thinking that at some point things were infinitely better. Anyhow, sorry. That's the movie is pretty good, actually. I liked it, but it's kind of weird.
So the point you're trying to make is just clarifying about
yes.
the idolization of the church in that time period.
Yes, and in particular, the 60s were a very big time of repression.
Yeah.
Very big in repression. They were just coming off of a lot of really big civil movements, and the church kind of responded to a lot of those by becoming so staunch in traditional and fundamentalism that those symbols became signs of a movement they were never supposed to be a sign of.
Okay, yeah.
And so when we idolize a church that was built on repression or pretend like it worked for all people, it really, really just didn't.
Yeah.
And again, that wasn't what Andy was saying, but
no, yeah.
I always have to go back and clarify, because there are some people who really think that those movements were like the glory days of the church.
I was talking more about the building and design, but yeah, I'm glad. I honestly had to think back to what I was saying, because I don't think I've talked in a while.
So I did what I always do, and I don't shut up.
It happens.
Yeah.
But I think art has this other aspect to it when looking at the past compared to the now. And this is no offense to artists kind of thing, but when you look back 100 years ago, is it easier to be original? Especially when it comes to art. There are less artists to replicate. There's all of this history behind the art that just isn't there, that if you 200 years ago, and if you're a basic artist, your art could be completely amazing. Sorry, I was just
I'm trying to figure out what
Paris.
you're getting at, because you're talking about art almost centuries ago and the differences between that and now, in terms of what was popular. Or
well, not in terms of what was popular, but the ease of originality. If you do something now, the likelihood that it's been done before is astronomically higher than it was 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago. The ease.
Well, in regardless of if it's been done before or not, probably more importantly, we have so much info on what has been done before too, because we're exposed to an uncountable degree of we're just exposed so much more to history and old art than artists at that point were to their predecessors, I would say too. But yeah, I'm sorry. Where were you going with that though?
That was just my thought that came out of the midnight in Paris talk. The ease and originality that comes with, and I think that's the easy the reason why we would appreciate the time before, because it's easier to become an artist kind of thing.
Okay.
This kind of a thing, and that may attach a little bit to this idea of churches kind of thing, because we lose the history as we go back. And so if we go back to the 1960s, we lose a lot of these scandals that have been happening in recent years, and with new technology and the ability to actually track and find out about people.
Yeah.
We lose a lot of these scandals. And so
I think that's part of it. I think it's also really, I think you said earlier, Ruth, calling us the nostalgia generation, because we really are. And I think a lot of what you're saying too, Andy, can also just be attributed to how crazy fast technology is just advancing in the past, even in just the past few decades, compared to the mid 1900s, especially. The more and more we advance and all that, and the more exposed and the more information we have readily available at our fingertips at any point, at any time, dating as far back as you can remember, or because we're advancing so much, it's so much harder to live in the moment, and it's so much easier to look at the past. And when it comes to now, everything is always being talked about, and everything is always exposed, and you can look up anything you want. Whereas back in the day, you were kind of just living. You were at least more living in your own moment, living in just your own story, and there was a lot of things that were happening in the world or in the church that weren't talked about because they weren't able to be exposed like they are today.
And see, what's interesting is in the 1960s, they would argue the opposite. Because in the 1960s, there was a pretty big, very popular thing coming to homes in America. You might guess. It
television.
is the television. And therefore, kids were seen as much lazier because they wanted to sit and watch. So for them, it was a lot less. They would make the same argument. You have to understand. But we forget. I mean, we didn't grow up in the 60s. We didn't grow up, obviously. But to me, the reason that it works, why we look back, is because we have an image in our head.
Yeah.
And especially as it relates to the church, what we can see concretely are numbers, right? You can look back at membership numbers of churches and see, oh, there were a lot of members. You can look back at old photographs and see, oh, there were a lot of people attending on Sunday. And we take that and then we compare it with our membership today and with our numbers today and the pictures of how many people are in our services today.
Right.
And it's drastically less.
Yeah.
I mean, across the board in churches in the United States, at the very least, it's significantly less. So this concrete image that we have is that this is what makes a church successful.
Right. Is what they were doing back then, because look at their numbers.
Because look at their numbers.
And you ignore everything else, or you don't know about anything else.
Exactly. And when you have when you have a faith that is based so much on transformation, on the spiritual experience, on walking with Christ, numbers being the main focus and becoming the main image is really frightening.
Yeah.
Because on one end you have, okay, there are scriptures that say if you're really living into the Spirit, then you will attract, people will want to come be a part of this movement because the Holy Spirit will be moving and working. But on the other hand, how many people follow cults? How many people follow all sorts of things that aren't wonderful? Andy, are you trying to calculate the number of...
No, I was just thinking about the comparison of calling the church a cult, and
well, but there are things... All that to say is that just because you have numbers doesn't mean you're healthy.
Yeah.
And what does show if it's a healthy movement is, again, me going back to, does the fruit stay? Does the church bear fruit? And what did the church of the 1960s really bear fruit of?
A lot of repression, right?
A lot of repression.
Yeah.
And so when I look at how we focus so much on image in the church today, I think, what's the fruit we're really trying to bear? Are we really trying to have a ton of people in our pews so we look good, so that way people can look back and say, wow, we were awesome once? Or are we trying to work for Christ?
Yeah.
And our focus too often gets shifted. It gets shifted right onto that image, that picture. We just want that picture of a full sanctuary. And that's really bad.
Yeah. I know we're running low on time, but it reminds me of, I believe it was actually, I think it was our D&D episodes when we were talking about the Reformation, and that a lot of Christians will reference the Reformation as, like we've been talking about today, like their idea of the glory days of the church because of how powerful, I guess you could say, like the teachings were, and how, like, the crowds that they drew in. But as we sort of discussed, or as Ruth especially was talking about on that day, it wasn't as, if you look at what was happening and what was being taught in this sort of lifestyle that a lot of people were being very much pressured into living, as opposed to just, like you were saying, the numbers, you'll kind of see that it wasn't really what you should consider the glory days of the church.
Yeah.
And that's not the only example.
I mean, the medieval church, you practically had to be a member of the church to literally function in society.
Is that the glory days? Just because?
Is that the glory days because of all... Yeah, I think no one's going to look at the church then and say, wow, we were getting it right. But it becomes harder when there are people who grew up in, the 60s who regularly attend our churches. And that hurts in a way when you see a bunch of people, and especially when you can't always, not every person who attended then understood what was happening or was even a part of what was happening with the church and being more repressive and things like that. And so there's a lot of sentiment attached to it as well. So I don't think it's entirely, like, I don't say this to, like, try and call out anybody who grew up in that church or who thinks that the church was great then. I'm sure there were wonderful churches then.
I think the whole purpose of us saying this is talking about the very idea that any time is the glory days. Because, like, we're talking about the 60s and 70s, but the whole point of us talking about the reality of then is also because we have to focus on the reality of now. Because just like the glory days, in air quotes, wasn't in the 60s, it wasn't Reformation, in the same way you shouldn't think that you're just living in them now and that we're doing things perfectly now either. Because in our own way, churches even now can be way too focused on their own image, and I think that's the overall point. Yeah.
I personally miss burning witches, but that's a topic for another time. We are running out of time today.
Oh
yeah, it's a
my
great way to end it.
That is a horrible way.
I was sitting on that one for a while.
Just gonna...
but we are out of time today.
Of course, we're out of time, Andy.
So
if you still want to listen to us after this.
We'll be back on Thursday. Let us know what you think about this topic of imagery. What does your church look like when you first walk in the front door? Who do you see? Who do you greet? That kind of a thing. You know, there are staples in every church that you go to. What's your go-to staple? Leave it in the comment down below on our YouTube video or Facebook page, Instagram. I think we have a Twitter still. Yep,
we still have a Twitter.
That every week.
Have we done anything on that?
I post the link to the things.
Oh, okay, great. Go ahead and give us a follow, leave a like, comment,
engage with us.
Engage, please.
We want to make sure we're not talking to nobody, buddy.
For all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Comma but.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week.